Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Behind Enemy Lines, a Texas A&M football podcast. I am Tony Catalina, as always, alongside a very bye-week special guest for us, Brandon Marcello from 24/7 Sports and CBS. Brandon, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. I look at the calendar and I get a little distressed because we're nearing the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I actually had that exact thought like 2 days ago when I looked up. I'm like week 11. Like this is
Yeah.
slow down, man. Things are just going way too fast right now.
Yeah. Sub team's got 3 games remaining. I mean, it's getting real. The end is getting near.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, the Aggies do have 3 games left. They're on a bye week this week before they come back and they'll host New Mexico State in week 11. Before we kind of talk about moving forward here, I want to get your thoughts on that South Carolina loss. Obviously, the dynamic of where they are in the rankings changes dramatically if they win that football game. But how do you feel about the Aggies probably, before kickoff against South Carolina and now that that game is in the books?
Yeah, it's a dangerous spot, mostly because we all knew South Carolina's been playing well all season, especially along their defensive front. And when you have a dynamic playmaker like Lenore Sellers at quarterback, that if he just doesn't turn the ball over, it gives him an opportunity because of what he can do there. It was a dangerous spot. And then you add on to that being a night game at South Carolina, which is one of the more underrated environments in all of the country at night at Williams-Brice. It kind of dovetail all that. You get out to a hot start, it's going to be hard to come back against that in that type of environment. And so that was huge. It's something almost like a polar opposite of what happened against LSU, right? Of course, LSU comes out hot, but A&M's got that home presence there to kind of help them kind of weather the storm a little bit. And then when you have a quarterback change with Marcel Reed, who's much more dynamic, that LSU for whatever reason wasn't prepared for, even though there's film on him. That helped them out, but was not surprising to see them lose at Carolina. The score wasn't even necessarily surprising to me because South Carolina it was like the water beating up against the dam the last like 4 weeks. At some point, they're going to break through. They should have beaten Alabama. They had a chance against LSU at home. I think they beat LSU if that was a night game at Williams-Brice Stadium. So, I don't think this is a loss that A&M fans need to be like hanging their head on too much. SEC championship hopes are still alive, which means obviously a playoff berth is still very much alive. So not much has changed after this loss.
And it's funny you say that because South Carolina, like you said, lost total of 5 points to Alabama, LSU, and Texas A&M had some leaky things, right? 120th in the country in penalties, and
Yeah.
and they were struggling a little bit in some areas, and South Carolina was able to take advantage of that. You had spoken about Marcel Reed, and I want to touch on that. How do you feel about that, at least from a national perspective, with the Connor Wigman, Marcel Reed? Should there be a little bit of both, or should they just stick to Marcel Reed and just roll with what they got now?
I would just stick with Marcel Reed. That's from a 30,000 foot view. I thought that, after that Florida game when they went in there and just stomped the Gators in the swamp. Florida is better than what they were showing earlier in the year. I think a lot of us were obviously judging them based off the performances against Miami earlier in the year. And for Texas A&M to go in there and stomp them the way they did, a lot of it was because of Marcel Reed. Now you're seeing Florida playing opponents much tougher, even with their quarterback situation the way it is there with all the injuries and them having to go now to a walk on. But I would stick with Marcel Reed, build toward the future with him. He's very dynamic. I was very much looking forward to this past week to South Carolina, Texas A&M, just because you had two dynamic quarterbacks, Lenora Sellers and Marcel Reed, going at each other. And that's a lot of fun to watch. I think you stick with him. Don't give him some confidence, make him the guy, move forward, keep building.
I agree, and he had shown a lot of good things, like you said, and his ability to run the football, and he has a good arm. I don't know if he gets the credit he deserves for the ball placement he has. I know there's some inexperience, and he'll get a little antsy in the pocket, so there is some learning that's going to come with playing more football. But you're right. I think they found a guy that they can feel good about in the future. He's a good kid. He's somebody who understands the system and he understands what they're asking of him. So that's all positive things for A&M. Moving forward off of this loss, the new rankings just came out on Tuesday, the college football playoff rankings, the first of its kind. A&M came in at 14. When you look at that, just a holistic view of it, that look right to you? Does that sound right? Is that where you figured they would be at?
Yeah, it's a good spot to be in, especially with the schedule remaining. In Texas, of course, coming to College Station this year to renew that rivalry for the first time in almost a dozen years. It sets up very well for A&M moving forward to get maybe an at-large spot, or obviously maybe get to the SEC championship game. A&M did enough to early start of the season to kind of get that ball rolling down the hill. They had their hiccup. They can't really afford hiccups the rest of the way, but at the very least, they kind of got that out of their system, and now they can focus on everything that's ahead for them.
For sure. And so obviously they got another tough matchup, just going to Jordan Hare Stadium and playing Auburn, but that is a football game they should
Yeah.
win, right? But you look at that Texas matchup. Ever since I got down to College Station, I've been, that game's been brought up to me every single day, like by somebody in the street, talking about it. But on a grand scale, is the national attention on that going to be as big as it feels here inside the state of Texas?
Listen, I've covered local beats at some big rivalries before, and it's never as big on the local level as it is on the national level, unless it's say number one versus number three or number one versus number two, and it happens to be a rivalry game too. But what's going to make this even more impressive on the national scale is one, the rivalry's back for the first time in a long time. It's going to be in College Station, which is huge for that rivalry game to be there. And then also you're going to have playoff implications probably one way or another for both teams in that game, barring something crazy happening between now and then between those two teams as they figure out the rest of their schedule. But it's going to be gigantic just from the rivalry standpoint. And then nationally, it'll have those national implications. But nothing will ever match the fever on the local side of rivalry games. They know what's at stake, but also – I mean, goodness gracious, it's a year-round, day-to-day thing. I covered the Iron Bowl rivalry in Alabama and between Auburn and Alabama for nearly a decade, and that thing every single day, it was something. And behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, I've covered the Egg Bowl rivalry for a few years on a local level, and that's maybe one of the nastier rivalries on a local level because they are going after each other like crazy behind the scenes. And that doesn't matter on the national level. No one's paying attention to the minutia of it, but it gets dirty. And nothing in my experience ever on the national scene can match what it's actually like on the ground.
Yeah, and that's probably what makes it so special is all of the other stuff you're talking about, right? Those two teams playing each other with the implications of what this could mean for the SEC, what it could mean for, national playoffs. Like there's just so much at stake. You're right. I mean, it's gonna have the big game of the week. There's, Kirk's probably gonna be here with, the guy, Chris Fowler and all them. It's just gonna be one of those environments. But like you said, it could have been in a parking lot in the middle of, Central
Mm-hmm.
Texas, and it still would have that same vibe. So that's what makes college football so unique is those rivalries. It doesn't matter. They haven't played in 12 years, whatever the case may be, it's going to be a big one. But before that, obviously we can look forward. They're not going to look forward. But can you learn anything about this Aggies team in the next 2 weeks, right? With New Mexico State coming up and then Auburn. Do we know what we know about them and then how they play against the Longhorns is where we'll learn more, or is there something to be gained here?
Well, going on the road to Auburn, that place is very difficult to play at Jordan Hare Stadium. Do we know what time that game is yet?
I don't,
That's critical. Auburn
I
has
don't
not. I don't think Auburn has played very many night games in the SEC this year. There, and that place is much different at night, just much like Williams-Brice of South Carolina. And Auburn's got a pretty darn good defense, and have all season. Their offense has been the issue for them. And so that'll be a big test for Texas A&M offensively, and doing so on the road. It's a nice, I hate to say warm-up game. It's a game Texas A&M should win, but it could be a lot tougher than a lot of people would think on paper just because of that. A lot of Auburn's games this year, have been tight, and then they just have a big mistake in the fourth quarter in the second half, and they blow it. I know with like Arkansas ended up winning by double digits, but that game was nip and tuck throughout. We just saw it recently with them in Vanderbilt. You can't. They always seemingly have one big mistake in their games offensively.
Yeah, and to your point, that game time hasn't been decided yet, right? Just checked while you were speaking. But you're right, a night game in that environment changes the elements. It changes you like to said, the feel of it, and it becomes a challenge, right? I mean, Texas A&M's road woes at this point are well documented. They got
Yeah.
off the schneid when they beat Florida, and then they were able to do it, a couple times. But yeah, Auburn on the road in a night game, like you said, is a totally different ball game. But looking at the full picture of this team, right, and looking at it, um, how do you see it shaking out? Obviously, it's going to take them running the table to control their own destiny. They're going to have to beat the Longhorns and everything that comes with that. Do you see it happening? Do you see, I mean, obviously it's possible, but how do you see it shaking out in the SEC, I guess, in a full scale?
I'm more interested, to be quite honest, to see how Texas reacts these next couple of weeks because I still don't have a great feel on them with the way they were just absolutely manhandled by Georgia, obviously. And they faced their quote unquote first big road test and eked out a win at Vanderbilt. And I say road test because, as we know, it was mostly Texas fans there, and yet they still struggled there in the second half quite a bit to pull off the win. So how does Texas perform their next couple of games? That's my big question. I got a good feeling on what A&M is offensively and defensively. I think what I really like about Texas A&M, like it or not, if you're a opposing Texas A&M fan or whatever, but they're just nasty up front along the defensive line. They're not afraid to shove people after the snap. They're always playing through the whistle, which is something you want as a defensive coordinator. You will take some of those quote unquote mistakes and penalty flags if it means your guys are playing just as hard before the whistle. There's some juice there, as the coaches would say. I like that from them. Texas, I'm not so sure that the juice is there, if you know what I mean, at times. And I think part of that is because then their schedule hasn't necessarily been as tough as we thought it was going to be, because obviously OU isn't what it is. Their toughest games have been Georgia, obviously, and Vanderbilt. I mean, we did not expect that at all, and they had some struggles there. So I'm going to be keeping my eyes more on Texas than I am A&M to see how they are going into the onto the road at College Station. That could be obviously it's gonna be quite the environment anyway. But is Texas ready for that? I'm not, I don't know.
I'm with you there. Like you said, I mean, obviously, probably because I'm, boots on the ground here, and I hear and I see the things. So I feel like you said, I feel like I understand what A&M is. What is Texas going to be? How are they going to respond to this? Where are they at 3 weeks from now? So I'm definitely there with you. And obviously, before we get you out of here, I'll ask you one more question. If you got something built up on this and it's a teaser and you don't want to spoil it, totally understand. But I guess simply you can say yes or no or expand on it how you want. Do you see the Aggies finding a way to get into the 12-team playoff here and kind of giving themselves a chance to fight for a national title?
They got to beat Texas. And the opportunities there, it's all you can ask for. I don't know who to favor right now. Again, I need to see Texas a couple more times, but you couldn't have asked for a better situation if you're A&M, other than beating South Carolina this past week. But in the end, it may have been coming down anyway to the Texas game, even with the win against South Carolina potentially. But because of where that game is in the schedule, because you lose that game and then you also miss the SEC championship game, you put yourself in a position to be out of the top 12 anyway, because that game wasn't played earlier in the year, even with two losses. So it's again, nothing really has changed all that much for A&M after that loss to South Carolina.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and it's a good spot to be, like you said, the Texas A&M in year one of Mike Elko's, program and everything he's building. They seem to be ahead of schedule, I would say. I think a lot of people
Hmm.
felt like this team would have talent, but how good would they be? It was something that had to be seen, and like you said, they got a shot, and that's all they can ask for. So, Brandon, I really, really appreciate your time, Brandon Marcello from 247 Sports and CBS Sports. Thank you for taking the time with me, man.
No problem.